Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Rabble Meets. It's not a former player or ex-referee, etc., etc. It's Heart and Hand's own Martyn Ramsay. Martyn, how are you?
Well, very well, Martyn. Good to be on, and thanks for having me.
It's strange having two Martyns, by the way.
Yeah,
Especially
easy for the
one who
visuals.
spells his name wrong.
Yeah, the visuals are all right at least because we've got a slight difference, but easier for us just to have a conversation. If there was a third person here and they had to address either of us, then that becomes a wee bit more difficult.
I don't want to get into the debate, right? Because I know I'm right. So, but Martyn with a Y is a surname.
Most commonly, yeah. I like how it looks. I always like writing my name because I've got obviously a Y at the other end as well. But it just gives me hassle. It has given me hassle since primary one about telling people that's a Y, by the way, and Ramsay's AY as well. So it's just that you're getting those corrections in early. That's a lifetime of that. So I thank my parents for that. But I don't share it with any other Celtic manager, so at least there's that.
There's always that. So you're here today to talk about your new book, Revolution. Am I correct in saying this is your second book?
No, it's not my first book. The first one was 3 years ago now, the 50 greatest Rangers games, which I told everyone, including my wife, would be the first and last and only venture into writing. It was a dream come true, blah, blah, blah. And it was a very enjoyable experience, and it went down very well. And I'll just have I'll put that away, and then it lasted about 2 or 3 months before ideas start swirling around, and we went again.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute. I couldn't get off it. I'm having a nightmare. What's the kind of process then for writing a book like this? Because memories can trick and play tricks on the mind. So was there a lot of digging, a lot of looking back at old footage, old interviews, stuff like that? Was it quite a long process, the book?
Yes. The process was quite long. I didn't really realise until I thought about it the other week. I mean that Greatest Games book came out in 2020, around June 2020, around September. I'm pretty sure I remember thinking, right, okay, there's the 9 in a row stuff. This era, we see it all the time. If you're hooked into Stephen Miller's stuff, you will see it every day. Probably action from that era. And I don't think we really know the story, and I don't think it's fully understood. I don't think it's well remembered, actually. And one of the things from the Greatest Games was, I think about a third of the games were from that period, which kind of makes sense. The demographic, great time. A lot were from that first year, that first Souness year, 86, 87. And then there were 7 games. The 7 out of 50 or 7 out of 13, 14, whatever it was, is quite big. From almost 12 months from Gascoigne's hat-trick against Aberdeen to Gough lifting that trophy at Tannadice. So just this almost fixation with the Big Bang start and the guys who finished the job with 92, 93 in Europe, really, chucked in for good measure. And that there's so many gaps there that I think we lose a lot down. And especially in my head was how Souness lost 87, 88, and how he then regained it with interest and started this big long run or whatever in league titles. We've forgotten quite a lot about just how chaotic that was. I'd quite like to write a bit about that. Maybe that's going to be the thing. Rangers fans and Scotland and the breakdown of that relationship over that time. That's interesting. That's always interested me. Maybe I could write about that, and how we consume, how we've changed as fans, how we consume football with the live telly, and just being, I think 86, 87, there might have been double figures in terms of live games. That was mainly because Dundee United were got to the final of a UEFA Cup final, 2-legged UEFA Cup final. So you were getting quite a lot there. And then by 92, obviously, you've got this explosion where you've got over 80 live games if you've got Sky, which a fair amount of people did, and Okay, so how does that change then us as fans and how we look at our team as the years went on? Certainly my generation, with so much football becoming just like wallpaper, but quality football. And those early Skull Cup victories, for example, in the fading light of the weekend where the clocks change, and they felt magical because, well, who the hell else were you watching? What did you really have to compare it to? You knew something was out there because we weren't winning European Cups, so you knew there was better, but you weren't forced to see it until a European Championships or a World Cup came around. So I think there was a wee bit of protection there, and then the curtains opened, and we're out in the world now. And I think our expectations as the 90s wore on, you're like, right, Walter, why is it not looking like that? I'm watching Serie A every week. Why do we not look like that? Why do we not train like that? Why do we not live like that? And also, the introduction of something like Championship Manager, for example, in 92, 93. And all of a sudden you've got teenagers like, if I know that Albanian second division centre forward is someone up and coming, again, why doesn't Walter and Arch, why don't they know of that? Just because
Why
you've
didn't anybody sign Mark Kerr?
Exactly. Why I've managed to get Bristol Rovers to an FA Cup final, so I know what I'm talking about as much as the greatest modern Rangers manager. So all those so there was all these kind of ideas floating around the head, and it was, what, I think there's a big project there. I don't think we remember it as well. There's so much going on, not just at Rangers, and this was the thing. Scotland's changing politically, socially, culturally. As I said, football is changing. You watch the 98 World Cup, you watch the 86 World Cup. France won it without a striker. The game looks different. How we consume it's different. Fans finding their voice. This little period between moaning to your pals in the pub or a supporters bus to telling the world on forums and social media, we had written fanzines, and that culture in the late 80s and 90s was huge, and it shaped how, certainly how a lot of fans viewed Rangers. So this whole big arching story I wanted to do, the first thing I did was get Fall of All. I a pal on Twitter who was selling them. He tried to sell me his whole collection. I said, no, I just need up to June 98, thanks, from the very first edition. So I do the pile of them sitting there, but 82 of them, I think. And in that October 2020, I just started reading those. It's a lot of reading and a lot of the same stuff being said on a kind of edition by edition basis, and taking notes, and eventually, because that's the thing, right, Martin? You've got all these thoughts in your head, but you can't sell that. It's just garbage.
No, you don't want to hear the thoughts in my head most of the time, I'll tell you.
It's the swirling kind of soup of ideas, and I needed to find a structure. And what I did sell in the new year of 2021 was right, 12 seasons. I'm going to write 12 season chapters. They're going to tell the story of each of those seasons with a bit of a wider kind of narrative. And in between those season chapters will be shorter chapters, like an essay, maybe just 2,000 or 3,000 words on how far did Maurice Johnson signing affect the sectarian issue, for example. Soonest
sorry, Martin, how deep into the kind of political side of it do you go?
That's where I wanted to, or why I wanted to get these separate chapters, so I could delve into them in a bit of detail. All those chapters could be like books in themselves, but I still wanted to give me a bit of space to do that and not make sure the football chapters are too clunky if I wanted to bring in something like that. So the one of the first ones is about Souness and his outright Thatcherism, and the Rangers Revolution really being a Thatcherite revolution in the way that it happened, the way that it was brought about, and ripping up the rule books, ripping up tradition, wage caps, no chance. We're not signing policies, no chance. Don't care how anyone feels about it. That it's modernisation. It's this kind of real abrasive, aggressive, ambitious modernisation, and hospitality suites and everything else. Just a commercial operation, being very much in tune with South East England. But not really on old Red Clydeside. So there's this real tension there, and the follow stuff is just a goldmine of that, with people loving this new success, obviously, but the real concerns about how it's come about. and these people that can we really trust Souness, and then Murray and whatever else, and that tension I think is just fascinating. So I wanted to give that space, the sectarianism thing. I wanted to give space, the media thing, Scotland and Rangers, all these kind of extra bits. I just wanted to give that bit of time to, and yeah. So the original idea was for this 12 season chapters, 12 essays, an epilogue, and a prologue, and away we go. And it became quite clear it was just going to be far too big. And so earlier this year we had a wee chat, the publisher and I, and we said let's do 2, and they needed to be 2 separate books, 2 separate stories. And actually, the more I thought about it, I hadn't really realised until I was forced to that I think these are 2 separate stories. So this one, Revolution, out now, 86 to 92, tells a forward-thinking story where Rangers are breaking barriers, reaching new horizons. The world really was our oyster. It felt, and I hope I get it over on the pages, that it felt that we could sign anyone and win anything, and would win anything. That the European Cup was something that was only a matter of time away, and that genuine ambition. But it wasn't moonbeams. It wasn't fantasy. It was rooted in kind of reality, given Rangers' position within British football because of the ban and whatever else, and how well we were doing it, kind of maximising that market opportunity, and how much money we were bringing in, etc. It really did feel that this was either an agent of change, or if we were following others, we were very closely behind the slipstream. And the Champions League is obviously the pinnacle of that. Rangers created that. We brought it into being because Bayern Munich had hammered us in the first round, and there was a board meeting where David Murray said to Campbell Ogilvie, surely it doesn't need to be like this. Surely we can find a way of having guaranteed games, and that's where that ball started rolling. And that's where I finish, and I'm nearly finished writing the second book, which tells another kind of tale that around 92, you've got this other revolution, a bigger one, or bigger ones, because there are a few that are going to swallow us up. And even though the next half, 92 to 98, is full of success, the same amount of trophies, by the way, same amount of titles, same amount of cups, and you've got the greatest ever season, you've got 2 of the greatest players there's ever been, and you've got this fabled 9th title in a row at Tannadice. And yet this feeling, this kind of bittersweet symphony going on around the time of Britpop, funny enough, that there's a bigger party elsewhere, and we're no longer in that way. Still a lot of chat from David Murray amongst others, but it was no longer rooted to reality, and things had disappeared and left us behind. And that's a different kind of tone from this first one, which is full steam ahead and Rangers at the end. But my argument would be, by 92, the summer of 92, the revolution's over. It's been completed. We are miles away from Celtic or anyone else in Scotland. It's now, you read the season previews of 92, 93, which should be full of optimism. Scotland, I know they were knocked out of Euro 92 at the group stages, of course, but a horrendously tough group. But Scotland played well. I mean, we really did. And there's no optimism at all. It's, 44 games. It's going to be an absolute endurance test. We know what's going to happen. There's not even a chat of a title race, and this is all done. And so that part of the revolution was done. The other part of the revolution of Europe, although we didn't know at the time, was becoming a bit of a fantasy, actually, even though 92, 93, of course, would get incredibly close to it.
Right, I've got about 1,000 questions. Right now, good. I was born in 1989, so I've got no recollection of obviously Souness coming in. I've got no recollection of Marseille in 92. My first memories were around about 8 in a row. So you mentioned there that traditions were ripped up, that Rangers were moving forward in this new direction. You also mentioned the media in that. How much pushback was there to this new kind of revolution that Rangers were coming forward with? Not just from the media, but from their own support. Was there any pushback from Rangers fans?
Well, one obvious sign of pushback. This is an interesting thing in the media, right? Well, in the media, it's funny because they changed, and Walter Smith complained about this quite a bit. Souness didn't really care, but Smith complained quite a wee bit. So, what are your rules? Because they were told in the summer of '86 and the previews of that season, you can't buy success. So you might have brought Terry Butcher and Chris Woods, and Souness might be here as well, but you can't buy success. And then when it started to come, the headlines would always have puns on money, and what turns out you can buy success. Well, lads, make your minds up here. This is either true or it's not. Now, there is an element of truth in it. Plenty of football chairman, sports chairman, that are looking at the receipts and then looking at what they've won, and it doesn't quite match up, because you still need to use it wisely. And that's really the story of 86, 87, by the way. We sometimes think of it as this, because it's been portrayed that way because of the cash, as some kind of Abramovich refit, where you get a new signing in every position. Rangers signed 2 key players that played. Souness you would add as a third, and then later Roberts. But it was their impact and influence on this current team, this team of, be brutal, losers. We're using that word quite a lot as we record, but players who had won bits and pieces, the odd Skull Cup, League Cup, but nowhere near the title. And all of a sudden, they're looking around at the manager, player manager, of course. He's on the pitch. Well, if he's on the pitch, who's going to boss our midfield? Who's getting past him in goals? And who is better at centre half than Terry Butcher in Britain? No one. So all of a sudden, you just get players just raising their levels, and that was the kind of key point there. So there was a resentment. There was also the thing that, well, English mercenaries, they won't. When the going gets tough, they'll leave. Well, 87, 88 got pretty tough, especially when 3 of them were in the dock and 2 of them were charged. And there was real fears. David Holmes said, look, if you want to go, we won't stand in your way. Of course, they didn't. Roberts would for other reasons, but not because of that. And they responded. And the 5-1 game, I think you see the media saying, okay, they're kind of here for keeps now, actually. And their way of doing things is here for keeps. And the constant comparison with Celtic and how they were not doing things. Rangers have got a stadium nearly fit for the 21st century. Celtics is barely out the 19th. And this family control, which Rangers were locked in as well, by the way. And it's one of the biggest decisions ever, was Marlborough's ability to get control of the club and be a majority shareholder, which Rangers never had. A proper majority shareholder, and therefore you've got drive. You can allow ambition to happen because you don't have all these competing blocks of interest saying, well, is this maybe a bit too quickly, or what about him, and what about that? You just have Holmes is given the full authority, full control to just drive this forward, and that's a huge moment. So there's a lot of media angst towards that. The fan stuff is right there in the early episodes of Follow Follow. Now, Follow Follow came out in August 88, so you had 2 seasons of the Souness Revolution before then. And if the Camel Coat Brigade is used once in a page, it's used 5 times. It's there all over those early editions, because people are coming back. And why are they coming back? Where were they when we were losing at Dundee and whatever else, and blah blah blah. And there is a real concern about what Ibrox is going to look like. Hospitality suites, commercial suites, what are they? That's not what normal punters do. You're turning this into something else. And Souness, he was seen as this, and he was an arch Thatcherite, which rubbed against a lot of the fans, especially when the 2 of them are standing in the Govan front and getting a picture taken and whatever. And people talk about, we have won and we have had more success, but at what cost? Is this really Rangers anymore? The ultimate, of course, being 10th of July, 1989, when Maurice Johnson signed. And I think these stories are well known, of course, that Souness right from the start says, of course, I'm going to sign, I'll sign anyone I want. And fans thought it might be an English player that maybe was a Roman Catholic, but that wasn't a particularly big deal in their life, or it might be a glamorous Brazilian, for example, and something quite exciting. It would not have been, of course, the man who gets sent off in that first season against us, had written in his book about how much he hated us, and revelled in being that Old Firm antagonist. But Johnson signing, the more I thought about it and wrote about it, there's a couple of things about that. You talking about this tension and this breaking up a tradition. It wouldn't have been possible in 1959. There would have been riots. There would have been boycotts. Genuinely, it would have caused genuine mayhem, not just tabloid sensationalism, not papers paying guys to go and burn scarves so they can get a picture. It would have caused genuine unrest in reality. A lot of talk, and of course there was a lot of talk and a lot of angry fans about it. But that anger's tested as it still is today with fans and ownership and whatever else. You either go or you don't. And Rangers fans had already shown that ability to vote with their feet in the early 80s. That's how change arrived in the first place. So it would have caused mayhem, but Scottish society had changed. And people had asked questions. Maybe the sign of Johnson will change Scottish society in terms of the sectarian question, without the cool observation that should have been there in 1989, that the only reason this signing could take place is because Scottish society had already changed. Mixed marriage, better employment law, and in terms of equality, and removing a lot of those, well, certainly removing a lot of those grudges. In reality, those grudges stayed as part of folklore and mythology to this day, although it's not represented in actual fact. But it was already changing. But what I think the signing of Maurice Johnson really said about modernisation is that he had an easy route to go back home and play for Celtic and earn decent money or whatever. Not as much as he could, but it was an easy route. The prodigal son, he had some bridges to mend after the way he left, but whatever. But for him to choose the option he did, and let's not shy away, the real danger of physical harm. He chose that for money and medals, and that's professionalism, and that's modernisation, and that's the new reality of football. That players were not beholden to tradition and whatever community they came from or whoever they played before. Where am I going to win, and how much am I going to earn? And regardless of the noise and genuine threat to physical safety, I'm going to go there.
I think it's incredible now, as we sit here in 2023, to think, that I would say probably the majority of Rangers players are Catholic, etc., etc. There wouldn't even be a second glance. But to try and put yourself in that mindset, 10th of July 1989, my mum was 18. I was born 8 days later. So it's a long time ago. How brave do you think, and I know we're going slightly off topic, but how brave do you think it was, not just from the club to bring in Morris, but even more so for Morris to come to Rangers? Because like you say, he could have took the easy road. He could have went to Celtic and got X amount of money, still being comfortable for the rest of his life. But the true professionalist in him chose, no, of course I want more money. Who doesn't want more money? But I want to win stuff. He could have went anywhere and won stuff. So why do you think he did choose Rangers? Do you think it was just because of the money in the medals, or do you think there was maybe another reason behind it?
He wanted home. That was true. He wanted, by home I mean Scotland. So in terms of going anywhere, professionally, he would have had options. He was already a super player before he went to France. He had developed his game. He was sensational for Scotland against France in a World Cup qualifier at Hampden. Up front with Ali McCoist, who would have known? Wow. So there was. He wanted back. It was brave for Johnson. Players were getting their cars checked for bombs. Pretty much constant surveillance and protection. You lived through in Edinburgh because that obviously made sense getting out of this circus. So it was brave. I always find the pictures that day quite telling, and maybe I'm reading too much into that's quite possible, but Souness and him are very close. Like it's almost the arms around the shoulder, very, very, very close and protective. And like this is not going to be easy. But he did, and Martyn, the thing that blew all this out the water, because right, we know about, people call it a signing policy, maybe a signing practice, maybe is more the correct phrase. But how Rangers would defend it, they couldn't defend it legally, they probably couldn't defend it morally. But the only defence was pragmatically like, okay, we of course we could sign a Roman Catholic, but would they come? And there's a difference between signing someone and then playing well. And at Rangers, as you know, and nothing much has changed, it's about effort. It's about bleeding blue, and it's about running through brick walls. And are they really going to do that? This mindset that should have been blown away with English lads that came in initially, that you had to grow up supporting the club to be able to play for them. But no one can doubt that effort. Certainly not for the first season, probably the first two. He was superb. But again, that's the new professionalism. That's someone going to their job to do the absolute best job they possibly can. And once he found out in early 91, 92 that it was up for grabs between the three of them, obviously Mark Catley joining the picture, and he wasn't necessarily going to be the starter as he was before, he read the writing on the wall and he moved to England because, okay, I want to play and I'm going to go there now. And there's no ties, no sentimentality. That's just life. Really ruthless, really cool. And I think that represented more about what was new in football than any religious nonsense, because he wasn't a religious man. For a start, it was not a factor other than the background and the Celtic thing and everything else. But yeah, that's what stood out for me, because we've all heard the story, but it was more that actual football and professionalism, and his bravery is in question, but it was to do that, and a lot more money, I'm pretty sure, at Rangers than what Celtic could offer. But that's fine. That's that professional streak. Where am I going to earn? And I can win titles, and he did.
Obviously, much further ahead in the future. Obviously, 2012 happened. Do you go into much detail? Maybe probably more so in the second book, I would imagine, the second part. But do you go into much detail about David Murray and spending and stuff like that?
A wee bit. And actually, it's in this book coming up. There's a chapter called "The Two Davids," and it's a kind of comparison piece in Holmes and Murray, about stewardship and about, I guess, the ideal model. And Holmes did represent the ideal kind of situation where you had a chairman who didn't want to be involved at all. Lawrence Marlborough, just he'd done that deal with Jack Gillespie. Again, Jack Gillespie wanted to be Rangers chairman. He decided to forgo that in order to do this deal that allowed Marlborough in. And I think it's just such a huge moment. But so Marlborough empowers and entrusts a proper chief executive, someone who's going to make big calls and is accountable to those big calls to the Rangers board. And that model just seems so dynamic. And again, this just... we need to be careful about saying, look, that model looks great. Can we have that now? Mm-hmm. It was of its time, and it was the perfect opportunity. And Souness actually saw the opportunity in terms of reversing the usual flow of labour and said, we'll just get English players to come here. And the board kind of looked at him and said, will that happen? Can it happen? Will the fans kind of buy it? But that kind of dynamism. And early Murray had something in that. But he was always going to be hands-on. And Souness talked about, then they used to go for dinner every Friday night. And before his first game as owner, wasn't chairman, David Holmes stayed as chairman to the end of 88-89. But he said he changed from, be good if we won tomorrow. We really need to win tomorrow. We must win tomorrow. It was under his skin kind of already. And again, look who's around Martyn. Bernard Tapie, Silvio Berlusconi, these guys, figureheads, presidents of football clubs. There's no way that David Murray was going to miss out in that. But even when we, obviously stopped, and there is a podcast available on our rival network, what's happening, about the dominant 54, 55 episodes I think we did covering all this. And, we leave that with Murray bringing in, or able to get 40 million out of someone, Joe Lewis, and able to do kit deals that are worth millions and millions and millions. It was, on the face of it, still working. But what we talked about there, and I've written a wee bit about it, was just this lack and increasing lack of governance, of board meetings. If something needs, we need to have a chat about it, we have a chat about it. We'll see each other on a Saturday, whatever. Now, Campbell Ogilvie talked about pre-Holmes and Souness. They would have a board meeting every Tuesday, and the agenda really wouldn't change. It was very officious. It was very stodgy. And nothing really happened, but we had to have it, and eventually get into a stage where, you'd hardly have one. You'd have as many board meetings as you absolutely had to have during the year to keep it and, kind of core it with the constitution and what have you. But it was very much on the hoof. And in 1998, as we leave this story, there's obviously some issues with Murray, and the fans are. They do have their problems, especially defending the club, and especially with the media. And he promised a root and branch kind of look at the coaching staff. That equated to replacing Davy Dodds, who left to go and do a paint and decorating business, I think, with Tommy Moore-Nielsen. That was it, and that was the extent of it. So there was frustration there. But what that does tell us is just how this lack of governance can go. And that's the interesting Murray story for me, is that there is a bit of dynamism. There's a fair amount of dynamism actually in the start, and it takes over neatly from the kind of Holmes stewardship. But there are signs, there are sleight of hands verbally, with when he speaks to fans, when he speaks to the media, that are precursors to what's eventually going to come in the next decade.
Now, you've said the book isn't just about, football, tactics, games, etc. You've talked about, there's political stuff, etc. in it. So it's obviously like a kind of no holds barred, nothing's off the table. You also mentioned that, in this revolution, obviously the main aim, because like you say, it got to the point where season previews were pretty much, right, well, how many points are Rangers going to win the league by? So it was all about Europe. So Marseille, how much detail do you go into about Marseille?
Well, Marseille will come on the next one. I've written about it, and a lot, because it was a huge season, 92-93. It is the greatest ever. I was 11 at the start of that. It was the first season I got a season ticket beside my dad. We went everywhere, relatively speaking. I wasn't allowed to go to Marseille. We went to Bruges, and I was going to Munich, right? I was going to what was called the European Cup final. Would later be called the Champions League final in retrospect, but I was going. We were going, and I'd be there, and it was full steam ahead. You just this belief coursing through the club, through the stands, because we just didn't get beat.
Yeah, we were going to win it that year, weren't we?
Yeah. So all of that was just powering through. So this, again, that's the next book. But anyone who's listened to the pod will know it's called The Impossible Dream. It felt possible, and it felt that we're going to do it. But it's why history's so interesting. You get that perspective of 30 years later to say it was never going to actually be on, really. And even if it did, it would be an aberration, because here's where the game's going to move. Here's what this new fangled tournament that you have created and that you're involved in, and it looks like you're going to be so close to winning. Here's where and how it's going to leave you in the dust, because it's about television markets, and it's about clubs bigger than you. And Rangers are still a big club at this time, but they're just that bit below. They want to be at the top tier. That's why we've created this thing. We know, I think, to be honest, that it's going to be something of a closed shop. We just wanted to close the door behind us on the way in. So capturing that excitement of what was possible. The football was exciting. I know the game at Ibrox. A lot of us were wondering whether this 3-match package, and Christ, are we going to lose 6 of these? We're going to get absolutely toasted here. And yet it was rocking by the end, and just building and building this feeling of destiny, which is kind of what it felt like. Special times, especially when you're an 11, 12-year-old boy sharing that with your old man, really for the first time, on a kind of week by week, up and down the country, abroad. My word, I was off school to go to Belgium and come back like a kind of hero because I'd been there with my programme and ticket. So everything just felt incredibly exciting. But it's only history that gives you the viewpoint and perspective to say, well, actually, things were changing. They're going to move it away.
Do you think the confidence and the belief that year that, look, we were going to go all the way, we were going to win it, we've got one of the best teams in Europe, and obviously it didn't happen. Do you think that kind of had some kind of effect in the later seasons where, you know, we done nothing in Europe? Do you think any of that the fact that we were so rotten, had anything to do with failing when we feel like we should have won it?
Well, a kind of hangover.
Yeah,
we may have been experiencing the first few months of this season. I'm not literally. Well, no, I'm not sure. I think, and I'm going to finish. Obviously, the first book finishes 91, 92. I kind of look at that as 91 to 93. That Walter's first 2 seasons, and you know, Trevor, Stephen, Dave McPherson come back. Obviously, that summer of 92, but it's roughly the same kind of core. A core that came of age, I think, at Hampden against Celtic in that Scottish Cup semi-final in the rain. Kind of band of brothers. We know how they fostered that team spirit. We do. It wouldn't be in any coaching manuals, I don't suspect. No. But it was special. They were a special group. They would run through the brick walls. We're a team that's playing in 3 domestic competitions in 44 game seasons in heavy pitches against hammer thrower teams, and it's energy exerted pretty much every single game. That catches up, and it caught up from 93 to 95 in players being just broken, absolutely broken, and trying to keep that team spirit the way we did just leads to more unprofessionalism. And you're coming up against teams who do not have the players that we have, do not have the resources that we have, but somehow they're fitter, somehow they're better organised. They've tactically prepared for the game, and a plan that involves more than can you give it to the number 8 or the number 11. And what made 92 magic, or 91 to 93 magic, domestic, your first Scottish Cup for the first time, a double for the first time in how long, and then we're going to win a treble in this thing, was very quickly out of date, and players who just physically couldn't do it. McCoy's broken leg being the kind of start of that, of players they were just running into the ground. But who's going to stop me? Gorham, for example, like Amikachi fell on his knee in Belgium. Didn't train for the rest of the season. Couldn't. Now, thankfully, it was just, I can't remember offhand what ligament it was in the knee, but it was the one that you can kind of get away with. But he couldn't train on that. And at that, he wasn't going to miss. It wouldn't be allowed now. You know, you'd be taken out.
What would health and safety say about that now?
Exactly, and it catches up with Gorham, right?
Yeah,
and that's the issue. You know, it players busting through this wall for this dream, and I think you've got, even with Laudrup's arrival, I think you've got 2 years of a hangover, and it takes, dare I say, it takes Celtic to win the Scottish Cup and say, all right, they're back in the picture. We need to have a think about this, and I think the sign of Gascoigne was important as the sign of Terry Butcher in revitalising, reinvigorating Anne Smith's decision to tactically change the system to accommodate him, which actually gives Richard Gough 2 great years, or certainly 1 great year, when it looked like his career was kind of running out of steam a wee bit, and we come roaring back in that 8 in a row season. So yeah, what made that team great at home and that 1 year in Europe wasn't sustainable, I think.
No, maybe not. Final question about the book from myself, because I do want to ask you one or two questions about the current Rangers team, if that's okay.
That's quite all right. It's quite a contrast.
So, look, Revolution, 1986 to 1992, right? Maybe this is a slightly unfair question, and obviously, you'll probably explain this in the book. But was it a good or a bad thing for Scottish football? Because you talked about, it got to the point where it was a bit like, I suppose you could maybe compare it to Man City in England. They're going to win the league. They've got the most money. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. Obviously, without getting into too much detail, how did it change Scottish football, and was it good or bad for it?
Probably good for Scottish footballers, because they started going, well, I want to earn that, thank you, or I'll go elsewhere. And it raised that. Scottish football had been terrified of television, so did English football, terrified of live television, because, well, no one will come to the game if it's on live. It was a curse of English football, and it obviously took for Hillsborough and the need to pay for the stadiums as laid out in the Taylor report, to realise that television was the answer all along. It was kind of staring back at them for the corner of the room. You build something, you market something that is attractive. People will watch, but they also want to be there more than anything else, right? So Rangers gave Scottish football a lift in that sense, in terms of interest and in terms of money. The fans coming back into grounds, a lot of Rangers fans coming back into grounds, fans everywhere wanted to be part of it. They wanted to knock us down, and we became for those initial years. But you get Dunfermline signing Isvan Klizma from Bordeaux, who played at Liverpool for something like 825 grand or whatever it was. Aberdeen signing well from Holland, for example, Schnelders and Hielhuis and Van de Ven or whatever. So initially, there's no question it was good, because it was competitive. And one of the reasons why Souness could afford that dreadful start to 89-90, for example, in a horrendous period later on, because the competition, the rest was so tight, they cut each other off. What eventually, obviously, the City example is a good thing. And clearly, it happened again, and this has happened again with Celtic. Although not many violins about the state of Scottish football I've noticed in the last 10, 20 years. But as Richard Gough or Smith would point out at the time, it's not really up to us. You improve the quality of your game. Rangers were involved in Super League discussions and breakaway leagues that would commercially have been better, given clubs far more, really what they did in England, the lead of the Premier League, where we eventually got 98, 99, was it? But I think some of the proposals floating about at a time where you're striking where the iron's hot, really. I think even by the time the SPL came about, we'd lost that impetus, maybe just a wee bit too late. So Rangers were driving that change.
Was it those at the top of the game then, Martyn, that just didn't catch up?
Always. And it's Souness would run into that obviously all the time. These kind of blazers. He felt it in Scotland that they would take care of themselves at trips before the players. I said, you're a bowling club chairman. I mean, I'm an international footballer. I've won the European Cup 3 times. Who are you talking to, kind of thing? I think they nearly got there in terms of the clubs breaking away, but Celtic pulled out just at the time they needed help with respect to their stadium, and the use of Hampden wasn't far down the line with that. So that may have been a moment, but I don't think it was Rangers being they were greedy. We were a commercial enterprise for the first time in probably forever. But there were attempts to move this forward. This kind of Scottish Super League, get out of the way that we've done everything, get out of this kind of standing structure that's probably dragging the game down. But not enough came with us, and well, because Rangers involved is probably one reason it's still with us. So any period of dominance isn't good for a league.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fair rule, but it's great for the club that's dominating if they keep their eye on the ball and don't get complacent and look at other things, because it can in turn be quite draining for them as well. It was good for Scottish footballers because they earned a lot more than they did pre-1986. But Scottish football as a whole, Scottish football clubs at the top, they had their chances, and they never had the ambition and the vision that Rangers had at this time. I think that was maybe a key factor.
Okay, so Revolution Rangers 1986 to 1992. Martyn, I know it's on pre-sale. I know you've had a very good reaction to it. So how do people go about pre-ordering and then obviously eventually buying the book?
Pre-order should be at heartandhand.co.uk/revolution. PayPal are in a few issues at the moment, so that might maybe leave that a day or so. And yeah, if you want it signed, that's the way to do it. If you want it, free postage and packaging, that's the way to do it as well. In the pre-order window, it's out on the 14th of March. It's certainly due out the 14th of March, and you'll be able to get it wherever you get your books on Kindle as well.
Also, it'll be available across, I always get mixed up. Hardback, paperback. You can tell I'm a podcast kind of guy, with my books.
It's on paperback, but the ebook will be available as well, and that should all be good to go on 14th of March. Yeah.
Have you ever considered, Martyn, doing audiobooks?
People ask this all the time. Yes, I would like to. Audible have quite strict quality standards just in terms of noise. You just hear a car going past right now. I do have another room in the house that I've tested it out, and it seems to go all right kind of later in the night at the back end. It's something I'd like to do. Something I hope I will do, but it's be for further down the road this year, hopefully.
Brilliant. So if I could just quickly ask, we are just obviously we're recording this on the 1st of March, a few days after a horrendous cup final. Martyn, it was announced today. Obviously, James Sands has left the club. He's went back to his parent club. Now, there's been, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, a lot of reaction, possibly over the top, etc. What kind of state are Rangers in just now?
It's funny, well, not really that funny. It's interesting is probably the better word. Ever since we came back up, any old firm post-mortem, it's kind of on two levels. We look at the game, we dissect the game as we've always done forever, never. And then there's this question, where are we? Where are we compared to them? Because we're pegged to them. That's just how it is, like it or not. And sometimes we've probably have been a bit too fatalistic, a bit too pessimistic. Certainly at times we've felt the other way. We've been a bit too encouraged by a good result and thinking, we're absolutely back in it. It's difficult. This one's felt tougher.
It feels different, this one, slightly. I don't know why, but it feels different.
In the 2019 final, the game itself, that was a gut punch because we were the better team and we had our chances and we fluffed those and they didn't. It was an offside goal, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not an optimistic person come the day of an Old Firm game. But that day in December 19, I was sure we were going to win. And that was a real disappointment on the night. But you know what? Okay, we responded well, obviously, through that December and obviously beat them at Parkhead and whatever. So we kind of got through that. And you could see there's something building. Still what to do, but we're on the kind of right track. And obviously we'd win the title the following season. I think people felt confident and hopeful because, new manager's undefeated. He's been here since, December.
I was really confident. I was really
I wouldn't say I was really confident, but we were certainly in contention. This isn't Warburton Rodgers stuff, right? The chasm isn't there. I think where we are in a one-off game, in any head-to-head with them, maybe the exception of Parkhead, which now has certain connotations. I think that Beale's got a big job. We're there in a few weeks, or a month or whatever, just over a month, so 5 weeks. So there's a big job there as to how we handle that trip. But Ibrox and Hampden, we're in it if we get our starting 11 right and we make the right in-game decisions, etc., etc. If Tav or Borna flip that free kick into the top corner, you've got a 15-minute cup final, and we could have won that. But we'd probably been kidding ourselves as to just kind of where we are. So we could win a game of football against them. The overall Rangers want to win league titles. And I think what fans mean when they're talking about getting back to where we should be, it's retaining league titles. It's winning 2 trophies a year. It's being the Rangers that people of my generation are telling them existed and did exist in the late 80s and early 90s, for example, and kind of getting back to that. That's what everybody wants. But it's that part, I think, is still difficult. I don't think there's any easy route to that. There's not a quick route to that. I might be wrong, but if we were suddenly bequeathed millions and millions and millions of pounds, I'm not sure how easy it is to invest that under FFP rules. I think it's still going to be a steady progress, but we need to make our decisions better. We need to make our recruitment decisions better. And still, I'm afraid, just because of, and this is a legacy of 2012, we still need for them to have a bad year.
Yeah.
We still need to get bad decisions, to
injuries.
Yeah, suffer some injuries. Just have one of those seasons, and that's the reality where we are. It's not a palatable reality, but it is kind of where it is. But the equation that Martyn has always been since we come back up, we need to do our stuff really smart, and we need them to be lazy and complacent and get things wrong, because the chasm that existed in 2016-17 was so big. That chasm doesn't exist anymore, but there's still a gap there. They're used to winning trophies. They have a culture at the club, for reasons we know about, given a kind of free run at being that club, where just every aspect of it will expect to win trophies. So when it doesn't happen, they'll be ruthless, but they can absorb a bad season in a way that we can't. Look at Beale. Beale deserved the criticism he's got because he had a bad day on Sunday. But there's just this kind of fallacy, I guess, around how we assess managers that almost there's such a thing as a clean slate, especially managers that come in halfway through the season. That I can compartmentalize this part of the season that's left, and then my job really starts in the summer. Well, it doesn't, and that's that. It's not fair. And in any other business that wouldn't be the case, but at this club that's not. And the frustration that Beale has borne the brunt of, I think, isn't about his how many games, what, 12, 13, 14 or something?
14 games.
Yeah. It's not about that, because that record's up till Sunday very good. It's 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weight of frustration with the odd beautiful moment, obviously, and with 55 and Seville and whatever else. That's the weight that he takes on. But I'm afraid that's just the reality of the job. How easy that is, how sustainable that is, I don't know. Because if you were looking at this rationally, you say, right, you could sack whoever you want, bring in whoever you want. You're still needing a longer term plan to get things in place.
Yeah.
We don't have that patience. We don't have that patience to get things wrong.
I think personally, for me, it was just simply, and this sounds this actually sounds really stupid because it's one game, but it was a team selection that every single person on the face of the planet knew was wrong. It was a team selection, I think, anyway, and maybe every time I start talking about this, I start to get angry. I don't know why, but about, what would you say, 5 minutes into the game, we all seen it wasn't working. About 10 minutes into the game, even more. Half time comes and you're thinking he's definitely going to change it. He has to change it. Whether he just brings on Raskin or even just brings on Jack, he's going to do something. And I've said this 1,000 times, 65 minutes, Martin. 65 minutes before he makes any sort of notable change. I think that's what's killed him in terms of criticism. And I think maybe that's why, if he had played Raskin and played Cantwell in their first Old Firm and they flopped in their first Old Firm, right, and we got overrun in the middle of the park and Celtic destroyed us, I don't think he gets anywhere near the same level of criticism as what he's getting now.
You still get some, because people would be angry. And what were you doing? And that's why managers can't win. He got it wrong, and most people, it wasn't out of left field. I think he had laid the groundwork that Raskin might not make it, that he felt that might be too much too soon. And I hoped he was just kind of play mind games with them, really, and try to kind of divert attention away. And it was disappointment rather than shock, because I think it was a possibility, but that was wrong. Tillman wasn't fit, and he's getting a lot of stick.
Which is silly.
Fit to play. No, he wasn't fit to play, I don't think. And I totally agree. I think half time was right. And now I know Ibrox, he didn't make changes at half time. He had his words, and Rangers looked a different team, and that fine. Tannadice's another one that springs to mind. There's been a few. There's a few on the Geo as well, where the Rangers looked a different team in the second half. So clearly he has chosen to rest on his powers of inspiration, but the first half was so blindingly obvious that it was going to take more than a half-time orange and a bit of Churchill to get things kind of moving. It needed new legs. It needed energy, which is what those players give you. And they were fearless. They were absolutely fearless when they came on. Then there's a Morelos decision, which that 10 minutes of hope, 10 minutes where we looked dangerous, where we looked cohesive, where Cantwell and Raskin were getting close to Morelos, so he was no longer being an out ball. He could actually be involved in play. And then he took him off to put on an out ball. And we lose, again, we just lose that kind of. It was not a good managerial day, but he's a rookie.
Yeah.
And again, taken out of context, that's going to happen. I guess the biggest question for him, if he tinkers at, I don't know, St Johnstone that we've been at lately, or Livy last week, and he tinkers around, tries something. He did it at Thistle. He did it at home at Thistle, didn't he? He played those a kind of selection of 10s that all got in each other's way and didn't work whatsoever. That you kind of say, right, okay, he's tried to be aggressive. He's tried to be flexible, and that's generally speaking a good thing. It hasn't quite worked. He's managed, or even if we drop points, right, that's annoying. We're out the league anyway. I guess it's the other way. He was conservative, very conservative on Sunday. I personally felt that at Ibrox, we needed Arfield. We needed to push them back in those final stages. And I thought the Sands substitution just invited more and more on. And we know what happened there. Again, another conservative thing. But his previous boss was also conservative.
Very, yeah.
And that's the thing. When was it? The September 19, the first Old Firm game of the 1920 season at Ibrox. We'd just beaten Warsaw, just qualified, dramatic circumstances, pumped, right? Really, really ready to go. And he drops Morelos. And again, quite a it was a team that reacted to Celtic. Now, again, we've talked in this pod about 90s tactical naivety. You still want a manager who knows, has their wits about them, and can try and negate their strengths and whatever else. But there is a concern, and I think it maybe I'm being too simplistic here, but I think it maybe speaks to just the general feeling and confidence and lack of swagger in the club, that when it comes to it, we will be reactive instead of proactive, and we will be conservative instead of brave. And that's indicative, I think, at many levels. Taking the heart out of the conversation, Martin, and the frustration and the pain as a Rangers fan, again, trying to look at it as maybe a historian would, even though we're living in the time, it's probably not unreasonable. The scars of the past are still there, but this is not a club that is living ambition. And that's desperately what fans want to see. And whether that's in a big game selection. And listen, the thing, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. What Michael Beale has shown is that we're absolutely capable of being very consistent against the rest. I think there's a small body of evidence, but I think big enough that we should be okay on Saturday, and then on and on and on. And as we know, Gio knows to his cost, Steven Gerrard knew to his cost in his first 2 seasons. Unless you can take care of the rest, you can't win a title. So that's big. That's very, very important. And I think there's a lot of confidence that he can do that. So that we shouldn't lose the plot completely. But in those head-to-heads now, when we're toe-to-toe and eyeball to eyeball, we need players that show the lack of fear that Raskin and Cantwell did in that brief moment, and set up to be a bit more proactive than we did on Sunday. And I think that's what fans get frustrated about. When I was on a bus at 2:00, I don't know where you were, but just this, right, it's a very flat midfield, and a midfield that doesn't have a lot of energy, doesn't have a lot of legs. And is Tillman fit? And is this really one that's going to take the ball and go at them, press them at their weak points, get Hart with the ball at his feet, get Starfelt with the ball anywhere near him, and
close down Callum McGregor, just close him down.
Exactly. So, but that's aggressive, and it's positive, and there's an intensity there that I think we lacked from the very start. And let's not get too carried away. Anyone can lose a cup final, and it is a one-off game. And in Beale's tenure, it is the first negative. But I think it's fair and reasonable to have a concern about what that says about just the overall feeling in the club, about our level of ambition and confidence and drive. And appreciate, given the book that I'm just releasing, there's a huge contrast there, obviously, because that's what that was all about, and we're aching to experience that again. I'm very conscious of that, but that feels lacking at the minute.
I could talk all night, Martin, but I shall let you get to your bed at some point, because if bar a power cut and a few other certain things, it feels like we've been here for ages.
Yeah, well, we got there in the end. It's been, and thank you for your patience.
So yeah, Revolution Rangers 1986 to 1992 is available to pre-order now. The link is in the description of this video. I highly recommend that you go and pre-order that. I'm certainly going to, and I'm not just saying it because you're on. I don't bully anybody, Martin, but I'm genuinely looking forward to reading it. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a pleasure.